everyone. So yes, thank you, Michelle, for that intro. My name is Natalie. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm a senior content designer at Nordstrom, like Michelle mentioned, and today I'd love to talk with you all about how to scale your design system through content integration. So, just a quick intro about myself. Like I said, my name is Natalie. I'm originally from Colombia, but I grew up in the beautiful state of Colorado in the US, which is where I am currently based. I'm passionate about the power of language, ethical design, and the impact that UX can have in creating equitable experiences. I've been with Nordstrom for 7 years in a variety of roles. And in 2021, I heard we were starting a design system, and I was incredibly excited about what that meant. So I transitioned to that team and have been doing design system work ever since. So just a quick rundown of what I'll cover today. I'll give a brief intro on Nordstrom since it's an American company and perhaps not familiar to everyone. Then I want to ground us on these terms, content design and design systems. I'll follow that with a deeper dive into my main topic, which is how we've been integrating content into our design system at Nordstrom. And lastly, I'll leave you with some takeaways. So, starting with some background, Nordstrom is an American luxury retailer. It was founded in 1901 as a shoe store in Seattle, Washington. So it's been around for quite a long time. I think the UK equivalent or something comparable is Harrods. So if any of you are familiar with that. And our purpose at Nordstrom is to help our customers feel good and look their best. We're known for our customer service. That is something that everyone talks about. And how to best serve customers is at the root of every decision that we make. We also have an off-price sister store called Nordstrom Rack. And we're committed to serving our customers when, where, and how they want to shop, whether that's in-store or digitally through our apps and website. And in service of making those apps and websites better, we began our journey of creating a design system in 2021. And that's where we find ourselves today. So now that we have that little bit of context set, I wanted to expand our scope and talk about what each of these terms mean: content design and design systems. So, what even is content design? During Tori's talk yesterday, someone in the audience asked, what's the difference between UX content, UX writer, content design? So some of you might have heard or worked with some of these content roles, anything from a content strategist to a technical writer or a UX writer. These roles all differ, but depending on the industry or company, they might be used interchangeably, or there might be some overlap between a few of these. A UX writer might also be doing content strategy, for instance. Content design is the newest role designation, and it actually has its roots right here in the UK. The term and discipline were created by Sarah Winters, who used user-centered design techniques to transform the UK government web content. And this is something that we heard about from Amy yesterday. If you're not familiar with the full background of content design, I encourage you to check out the history, as it's a really fascinating case study of the breadth that user-centered design can truly take on. So, a content designer wears many different hats and can take on a lot of different roles. But at the end of the day, content designers design with words. In their 2020 book, Writing is Designing, Michael Metz and Andy Welfel put it perfectly. They said, writing is about fitting words together. Designing is about solving problems for your users. They make the point that to find the right solutions, writing and design need to team up in your brain and work together. So in this way, we should think about content designers as true designers. It's not just a cool title. Content designers are crucial in creating user experiences. So this is an example from the same book, Writing is Designing. And when you think of UX, most people tend to think of design because that's what's most notable. We notice and we appreciate beautiful design. But how usable are designs without words or language? What would this DoorDash experience look like if you removed all of the words? You'd have no idea what to do or what this app even is. And I love to share this example because it's easy to focus on the visuals, the most attention-grabbing elements. But without words or language, product design wouldn't exist. And more importantly, user-centered design wouldn't exist. So I argue that content design is user-centered design. It's an integral part of building great user experiences. By incorporating content design into the design process, we can make more holistic products that better serve customers, products that actually give them what they need. We can tackle problems further upstream and incorporate the solutions into the design, rather than trying to solve them later on with workarounds. So, how does content design play into design systems? The role might be a bit different from what's considered a traditional content designer, as much as a discipline that's only about a decade old can really have traditions. But at the root of it, it's still about fitting words together and using design thinking. And as we learned from our previous speaker, Nathan Curtis, 8 years ago, a design system is a product serving other products. Design systems make it easier to build those products. They allow for consistency and enable traditional product teams to innovate. They free them up to solve problems unique to their areas. So, if we agree that content design is user-centered design and an integral part of creating products, and that design systems are a product serving products, why wouldn't we integrate content design into our design systems? Just as we would into any other product team. So now I want to share a little bit about Nordstrom's approach and how we've been incorporating content design into our design system from the beginning. I'll talk a little bit about my role, the initiatives I've worked on, and the general day-to-day work that goes into being a content designer for design systems. I categorize the work that I do into these 4 areas: documentation, content strategy, communication strategy, and branding. And I'll go over each of these, highlight some of the benefits from having dedicated content support relative to each area. So starting with documentation, which is probably what first comes to mind when thinking of content support in design systems. We use zeroheight as our documentation platform, and we absolutely love it. I'm so pleased to be here with you all today. And I broke up this category of documentation into 2 parts. The first is what I did to launch our documentation site. This work included extensive research to determine our site structure and information architecture, what information we should launch with, as well as what should be included in the documentation for each component page, how we were going to handle versioning, and much, much more. We also had a Confluence site for our team, so I had to figure out what would be transferred from Confluence to zeroheight, what would stay, and what type of content would live on each site going forward. This is just a clip of a content audit that I did of our Confluence site at the time. And I used design thinking to consider our audiences and their different needs, what they might expect to find in each space. As Nathan was talking about, I also project managed this initiative, so that meant doing everything from establishing the release timeline, determining scope, setting deadlines, outlining dependencies, everything that goes into a good project plan. The second part of documentation is the actual maintenance of our site. We originally launched our site in September 2022, so it's been just over 2 years. And since then, the work has shifted to more of a care and maintain mode. And with that shift, my responsibilities have also shifted. I went from doing really foundational work, from determining a lot of hows, how we were going to structure our site, how we wanted our documentation to look, sound, and feel, how we were going to handle version control, to much more management type of work. And today, I'm accountable for the site. I manage our updates and releases and storybook coordination. I'm accountable for ensuring the quality of both the content that we, the design system team, produce, as well as any contributed content. And I'm accountable for ensuring that all of that content feels cohesive and like it's coming from one voice. And we've come quite far with our documentation in just 2 years. This is an example of what one of our MVP documentation pages looked like when we launched. This was a legacy messaging component that we had at the time, and as you can see, it's pretty limited. And this is our documentation for an alerts component that we launched this year, which replaced the messaging component you just saw. You can tell how much more robust this documentation is, how it's filled with valuable examples that anyone, whether design, engineering, or product, can take to help them understand the component and how to use it. So, what are some benefits of having dedicated content support for documentation? First, it facilitates the use and adoption of the design system components by having dedicated and comprehensive guidance. When we launched the design system, we outlined a Moscow prioritization method to establish how we determine when components would be considered done. And documentation is part of that requirement, meaning that we don't ship components until there's documentation ready. The components have to be ready on 3 fronts. The design is in Figma, the component is in code, and we have documented guidance. And this ensures that we provide multifaceted support for all of our components. A second benefit of having dedicated content support means that each discipline, UX design, content design, and engineering, is able to focus on their dedicated scope. Designers and engineers aren't accountable for a secondary role outside their area of expertise. And lastly, it prevents the documentation from becoming stale or outdated. Whenever we get feedback that something in our documentation is unclear or missing, we make JIRA tickets to update the guidance. I pick up those tickets, make the edits, and update the site. By doing this work, we not only ensure that our guidance remains current, we're also signaling to folks that if they give us feedback, we'll act on it. It's another way of us engaging with our community. So, moving on from documentation, the next category of work that I do is content strategy. And so far, this has largely been related to component creation. When we create new components, I'm involved from the very beginning. For each new component, we tackle discovery from a design, content, and engineering perspective. And for me, this isn't only doing internal and external audits of components. It also means research for things like what we'll name our component. Is it an alert or a banner, a modal or a dialogue? What's the difference between the thing as a UI component versus a UX pattern for us specifically and for our needs? And the same is true of component concepts, props, and categories. It took a few components for our team to realize the benefit of having internal alignment between what we were calling things on the design side and engineering side. So I worked to determine what we call the general concepts and elements of each component. And importantly, I make those determinations in the context of components that share the same attributes. This is an example of our alert and modal dialogue component. And when we were creating both of these, I was really mindful about how each element of the component would be named. Even though these components are completely different and used for entirely different needs, looking at elements across components benefits not only us, the design system team, by enabling consistency, but also our users. By using consistent content patterns, which is a pillar of UX writing and something that Tori talked about yesterday, we reduce the cognitive load of our users and make it easier for them to understand and adopt what we build. And here's what that looks like on a practical level. When we were working on a modal component, we created a decision log to keep track of all of the decisions we were making along the way. Content decisions were included in that. We outlined what each element of the component was and what the term we used for it would be. And doing this helped us throughout the life cycle of developing the component. Whenever I was talking with my designer or engineer, and referred to something, we were aligned on what that thing was. And having this early on also helped when it came time to creating the component API because we already had alignment on the language. And the same work applies to component categories. We display components as a flat list in our documentation, but each component can still fit in a category. When we started our discovery for alerts, we went really broad. We wanted to determine the difference between alerts, banners, callouts, toasts, all of these components that could be fairly similar. We ended up categorizing all of these into a category of feedback or communication components. And doing all of this broad discovery has allowed us to be more intentional with the components we create to ensure that they provide value and are what the product teams need, not just what we think they need. It also allows us to move quicker because we do all of the groundwork up front. When you're building something that hopefully a lot of other people will use, the rationale behind every decision needs to be crystal clear. And that's part of my job. Thinking about terminology and names and the things that many people won't think twice about, but for those who do, knowing that it makes sense. So, what are some of the benefits to having someone dedicated to content strategy? First, it produces more well-rounded components. By tackling components from a design, content, and engineering point of view, we're able to create components with various disciplines and needs in mind. It also allows us to solve UX and CX problems further upstream. In the process of doing discovery work for components for toasts and dialogues, the designers and I found multiple instances where the current components lead to really cumbersome experiences. We found instances where the customer experience was compromised. By incorporating content strategy into the discovery process, we've been able to design and develop components in a way that account for edge cases or certain experiences that just might not have been considered otherwise. And lastly, involving content from the beginning prevents the design system from committing the cardinal sin of UX that some product teams end up falling victim to, which is thinking that content is secondary to design and that content folks can be brought in at the end after decisions have been made and everything's been declared so that they can just fill in the blanks. Please don't do that. Okay, moving on, the next category of work that I do is communication strategy. Now, if content strategy is largely related to component work, communication strategy is the higher level content needs. As some of us might have experienced, design systems are often a grassroots effort. So after much of the foundational work that I did at the beginning, establishing content standards, processes, vision, and after beginning to ship initial components, everything that I've just talked about, my scope expanded. As a team, we were having conversations about adoption and how we could get teams to want to use what we were building. As is often the case in large organizations, we had leadership support, but we were also coming up against competing priorities. So I started shifting my focus between my day-to-day tasks, component discovery, documentation, content strategy, and these higher level initiatives. A quarterly newsletter and communication matrix. And thinking about our day-to-day communication and how we communicate over time. As any good marketer knows, if you're trying to sell something, you need to know who you're selling to. You need to tailor your message to your audience. So I created a communication matrix for how and when we needed to communicate to different audiences. Again, thank you to Nathan Curtis, because this is pulled from work that he'd done. The communication that we send out to individual contributors to get them to use what we build isn't necessarily going to be the same communication as what we send to leadership to show the value of the work that we do. And it's important to know these distinctions. It's also important to think about everything holistically. So I often have this question in the back of my mind. How do all of our communications contribute to the story we're trying to tell? I wanted to drill in a little bit deeper on two items in particular that have helped us to tell that story: a year-end review and newsletter. Both of these came out of the communication matrix and the need we identified for a type of broad communication that could be sent to leaders across UX, product, and engineering orgs so that we could share what we were doing and help them see the value in adopting the components we were building. The year in review started out as just a list of everything we'd accomplished the first year that we were fully staffed. From there, one of our designers took the list and designed it. And as you can tell, visually, it was beautiful. But it lacked a story. I recognized the opportunity to turn the list of figures and stats about items we'd shipped and work we'd done and create a narrative around them, to add context to those numbers, to give them value and meaning. And this was the end result. Not only did we get a great response, but it also gave people insight into everything that our team had done and been part of over the course of the previous year. It helped people to contextualize the work that we were doing in various areas. They realized how extensive our depth was. The newsletter is another of those high-level artifacts that we've gotten really great response to. This was something we'd had on our list of aspirations for quite a while. So last year, I started to develop the initiative to determine how we wanted to tackle it. And I was really mindful about having a clear point of view on what the purpose of the initiative was going to be. Because it's really easy to say, let's launch a newsletter, but without a clear idea of the intent, the purpose, and what you hope to get out of it, sustaining the initiative gets harder and harder over time. Being able to strategize and have that clear idea from the beginning helped ground us and has allowed us to send out the newsletter consistently. We've also gotten great feedback, not only from our immediate community of designers and engineers, but also from leaders. This is probably really hard to read, but this is just a note that we got from our engineering manager after an on-site they had earlier this year with tech leadership, calling out how the newsletters that we've been sending out, how they're enjoyable and easy to read, providing valuable updates in a concise manner. So this was really great feedback to get. What are some of the benefits of having someone dedicated to communication strategy? First, it prioritizes high-level work that otherwise might not see the light of day because no one has the capacity to take it on. I remember when we were starting out, we talked about eventually, hopefully, maybe one day having a blog or newsletter. Not only were we able to create a newsletter, but we've been sending it out consistently for the past year, as I mentioned. And that's something that I'm really proud of. It also creates awareness and helps keep us accountable by communicating consistently. And lastly, having dedicated support streamlines communication, which in turn helps us build trust among partner teams and cross-org leadership, and that ultimately leads to increased adoption. Okay. The last category of my work is vision work, especially as it relates to branding. When our team was created, this meant establishing the values and tenets that were going to guide our team and the work that we did. And from there, it grew into defining our audiences, personality traits, and identity. And this is something that's ongoing. For instance, our design system serves Nordstrom and also our sister brand, Nordstrom Rack, and our enterprise teams. So on my mind have been these concepts of what's our personality? What do we sound like? How do we represent that we're a multi-banner system? We're also at a stage of maturity where we want to give our system a unique name. So 2 weeks ago, we had an on-site in Seattle where our team got together to run workshops around our personality and identity. And this is one of the slides from that workshop where we were determining our personality and how we want the design system to be perceived. Knowing our personality informs how we sound and feel. What does our site evoke? Are we more friendly or authoritative in our communication? Does our site feel calmly pleasant or buzzy and energetic? By answering these questions and having a clear vision, we're doing the work right now to continue supporting the growth of the system. So what are some of the benefits of having someone dedicated to branding? First, it allows us to create a cohesive narrative for the design system and facilitates decision making by knowing what our values are, who our audiences are, and what our personality is. It also helps develop positioning, communication, and adoption strategies. Content designers come from various disciplines and backgrounds: communications, marketing, public relations, social media management, you name it. That diversity makes us uniquely positioned to flex to the many different needs of design systems. And finally, it provides a solid foundation for scalability and future growth. By starting to develop a brand for the design system, we're feeding our vision of where we want the system to be in 2 years, 5 years, and beyond. So hopefully what we've talked about so far has resonated with you, and I just wanted to leave you with a few parting thoughts. If you're on a design system team or manage one, I truly hope you see the possibilities that come from having dedicated content support and that you feel energized about them. But you might be asking yourself, like, what can you do after this? First, I encourage you to recognize the value of content. Content is crucial to creating user-centered experiences, but unfortunately, it's so often overlooked. Second, advocate for content support. If you don't have content support yet, ask for it. Make the case of not only why it's needed, but also how much it could help future-proof and set up your design system for success. Lastly, if you already do have content support, consider any untapped possibilities. What role is content currently playing? Is it more of a technical writer? Is your content support only tasked with documentation? Could they do more than that? As I was putting this talk together, I found myself coming back to this visual of an iceberg. When thinking about content, it's easy to think that the only role or need to be filled is documentation, but really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. When I think about what I do, documentation is just a small fraction of my job. So much of it goes beyond that. And don't get me wrong, documentation is important, certainly, but so is the content strategy, the communication strategy, the branding, everything that helps to set up the design system for success. The entire part of the iceberg that you can't see, that's where the true value lies. And that's what I hope you leave here feeling inspired to tap into. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was amazing. And